Because I mean, what's cool is like, it is literally the ARM 610 that was developed with Apple for the Apple Newton is the core of all the ARM processors.
Welcome to Season 4, Episode 2 of Acquired, the podcast about technology acquisitions and IPOs. I'm Ben Gilbert.
I'm David Rosenthal.
And we are your hosts. Today, we are going to explore a topic that has flown relatively under the radar despite being the primary component of every single one of our phones. SoftBank's $32 billion purchase of the British-based ARM Holdings. For folks that listened to the previous episode that we did on SoftBank, you know they were once a Japanese telecom and multinational conglomerate now that has a close to $100 billion fund that they have created massive disruption in the startup landscape. And here we are diving into kind of the deal that started it all, and with just an essential piece of technology that we all use every single day. Listeners, you know that a few months ago, we started our limited partner program for folks to go deeper on technology, startups, and VC topics with us. David, I wanted to say that I'm particularly pumped where we landed in our last episode on investment theses on ambient computing and processing happening everywhere as sort of the next enormous technology wave. So I think it's super relevant to this episode, and we will find out why as we dig in. So if you're interested or you just want to support the show and like what we do, you should click the link in the show notes to consider becoming a prestigious Acquired limited partner, or go to kimberlite.fm/acquired. All right, listeners. Now is a great time to talk about a new partner of ours here on Acquired, Legora, the agentic operating system that is redefining how the world's best legal teams work.
Yep. It's sort of obvious that AI is going to completely change the legal industry. I bet most of you listening have dropped a contract into some sort of AI chatbot out there. Legora took that insight and asked the question, what if you really built something with that power from the ground up for the legal industry?
So the founders did exactly what great founders do: operate with obsessive customer focus. They embedded inside a massive law firm for months. They sat with the lawyers just watching how the work really gets done.
And that's how you get features that customers love, like tabular review, where you drop in a folder of hundreds of contracts and it pulls every key term into a grid a lawyer can actually work with. Legora's bet here is interesting. Since it lets each lawyer handle more complexity, any given person can increase the quality of their work and do higher value work. And this means that the pie can grow even as each individual task takes less time.
And they recently launched Legora Agent, offering greater intelligence and performance. The agent lets lawyers set an objective. Then it can handle the planning and the execution and delivery of the final product. Legal teams get to maintain full control and transparency, since they're still involved where judgment is required.
And Legora works where you already work. You can use it within Microsoft Word while redlining or drafting. The early Legora numbers essentially speak for themselves. When they have a head-to-head pilot with their top competitor, they win 70% of the time. Legora now has over 100,000 lawyers on the platform from 1,200 legal teams in 50 countries. And crazily, they went from 1 million to 100 million in ARR in about 18 months.
Truly insane numbers. And that is the real test. Plenty of things demo well, but the question is whether a busy associate actually reaches for it during crunch time, or whether a partner trusts it before going into a conversation with a major client. If your legal team wants to check it out, whether you're a law firm or you're in-house at a company, you can learn more at legora.com/acquired, and just tell them that Ben and David sent you. All right, David, I heard a rumor that you have one more thing for listeners.
Indeed. One more thing. We passed 1 million downloads in the lifetime of Acquired.
Woo!
Man, huge milestone. And to celebrate, we are going to do, you heard it here first, a worldwide virtual Acquired meetup. So we're going to host this in Zoom. Ben and I are going to be on video, and we'll have everybody else in the Slack community. We've got a bot installed that's going to do aggregate AMA questions, and we're all going to hang out. So we're going to do it on February 21st, 2019 at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. We thought that would give everybody, at least in the US, be 8:30 East Coast, 5:30 Pacific, and it's 9:30 a.m. in China for our listeners in China. So be there, be on Slack and on Zoom, and we will all hang out then.
David, it's time.
It's time, indeed. Well, today we're going to be talking about ARM Holdings, and we're going to go literally from Isaac Newton to the Apple Newton to Masa and SoftBank and beyond.
It's quite the scope, man. The first thing for listeners to know before we even dig in here, this chip company manufactures a total of 0 chips, and in many cases, they don't even design them either.
Yeah. Well, we head to the prestigious and well-known Silicon Fen in Cambridge, England, home of Isaac Newton, inventor of modern physics at Cambridge University. The time is 1980. And in 1980, in England, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, which controls the most popular radio and television stations across Britain and is a government entity, they've teamed up with the UK Department of Industry and Department for Education, and they're launching a major initiative that they're calling the BBC Computer Literacy Project. And the goal is to educate the public, and in particular, young people at this time, about computers and train them for the coming personal computer revolution that everybody thinks is right around the corner. And indeed it is. So they create a nationwide television series that they call the Computer Program. Get it? The computer program.
Ayo.
On television. Hey. That they show on, I think it was on BBC Two, to the whole country. It's a serialized program about how computers work. But the cornerstone and the really cool, ambitious thing that they're doing is they want to put new microcomputers, true like personal computers for the first time, into schools all around the country for children to learn and play on. So this is like super similar. So this is like a government version of Apple's strategy in the US at the time of getting Apple IIs into schools so that kids can learn and play on computers, with the idea that like eventually they'll grow up and then keep using Apple as they grow up.
Google strategy today with the Chromebooks.
Indeed. That I think is working really well.
Yeah, I think so too.
The BBC, together with the government, puts out a call for bids across all UK technology companies at the time to create this computer that they're going to put into schools. And they end up awarding the contract to a little company in Cambridge called Acorn Computers. Now, if you're a real computer history buff, you probably know about Acorn Computers. But who were they? So they started life in Cambridge. I believe they were initially called the Cambridge Processing Company or something like that. They made CPUs. It was a play on CPU. They made processors for other companies. But by this time, they'd started making their own fully integrated systems, like the Apple II. And supposedly they chose the name Acorn because it sounded like Apple, but it was ahead of it in the telephone dictionary and directory. So when people were looking up computer suppliers in the telephone directory, they would see Acorn before Apple.
Clever
Maybe
girl.
that's how they won the bid. So they win the contract, and they get to work on the device. They're hard at work at it. They know this is like a huge opportunity for the company. In December of 1981, they start shipping it to schools around the country, and it's branded as the BBC Micro. And this is like a legendary computer in computing history. Like literally a whole generation of British kids grow up with this as their first, exposure to computers. They end up selling over 1.5 million units, almost all in the UK, which is like super good considering the Apple II was on sale for over 16 years and only sold 6 million units. So like, man, the power of like government sponsored programs. Crazy. So another thing though happened in 1981 that was pretty important, turned out to be far, far more important than the BBC computer program, which was that IBM introduced their first IBM PC in the American market. And the IBM PC was the first like personal computer that was, because remember, computers before then, they were like in professional and business use. It was the whole client server model. It was terminals, terminaling into the servers. mainframes, all that. Like, think about like what NASA was designing like the Apollo program on. It wasn't personal computers. So when IBM introduces the PC and it's targeted at business and professional users, this is really like everybody in the industry now is like, okay, wow, like this is opening up this whole huge market where like it's the beginning of like software is eating the world, right? Like now computers are going to be on every desk of every worker in every industry, in the world at some point, with IBM, the power of IBM behind this. So Acorn realizes this and they're like, okay, like the BBC Micro is great. This has been great for our company, but like it's an 8-bit microcomputer. Like it's a personal computer, but it's nowhere near powerful enough to compete with the IBM PC. We need to create our professional computer. So they start a project. They call it the Archimedes project. This must be like a legacy of, Cambridge and academia and like having these, scientist and mathematician names. They realized though, the processor that they'd been using in the BBC Micro, they hadn't designed it. It was an off-the-shelf 8-bit processor from a firm called Moss Technology. It was called the 6502.
This is when processors had really cool names like 6502.
Yeah, super cool.
I miss that these days.
Yeah, I know. Although ARM's naming schemes are not really much better.
Yeah, but
those
don't end up becoming consumer brands the way that like A11X or something like that does.
Yeah,
although A11X,
totally.
We've completely gone back. Never mind. My point is completely destroyed by the fact that Apple is calling chips like it made sense when it was like A5.
No, Bionic
A6.
was a couple.
So Bionic actually means nothing. Yeah, I don't know, but they actually don't mean anything. It's a marketing brand that doesn't. It's not a modifier on the name of the chip, which is like A10 or A11. It is just it's kind of like Mac OS 10.4 Leopard, or I think that's wrong, but yeah. Anyway, too many digressions.
Anyway, so Acorn hears that Intel, off in California, their processor company, everybody knows about at this point, they are working on the perfect processor that they can use in their new Archimedes project. It's going to be a 16-bit processor. It's getting a ton of buzz, and this is like a super famous in computer history. This is the 8286 processor, which would eventually become just the 286, which successors would be the 386, the 486, and then the Pentiums, and then every modern Intel chip that we know today. This was the first.
The x86 architecture, if you will.
Indeed. This is the first of the x86. So Acorn's like, oh, cool. Like, hey, Intel, like we want to, be a customer to you guys. Can you like, ship us over some so we can build some reference, PCs and start working with you guys. And for some reason, and this is going to go down as like one of, there are a few of these moments on Acquired of like, history turns on like a knife point, whether it's Blockbuster or here Intel. Intel makes one of the worst business decisions in history, in all of business history, and says, no, you guys, BBC Micro, come on, you're some like little PC, company in Cambridge, England, not even Cambridge, Massachusetts, like, we don't care about you guys.
Yeah, surely nobody will ever, decide to do something on their own when we tell them no, and then eventually lead to our own demise.
I mean, we're Intel. Like, who else is going to make, high performance computing microprocessors in the world except us, Intel?
Well, I noticed you said high performance, so I think that it probably is still true.
Well, it depends how you define high performance. So Acorn, they're kind of out of options, and they're like, well, what can we do? What do we have? The one thing they have that basically, very few other computer companies in the world, even really Apple at this point, they have a ton of super, super smart physicists and engineers and early in the burgeoning field of computer scientists, students from Cambridge University, where they're located, that they've employed, either as interns or full-time staff. And these people are like super talented. And they decide, what? Maybe we can just build our own microprocessor. Like we started as a microprocessor firm in another era. Let's try it again. They decide, they give the task to a team of engineers on staff, and they say, okay, we need something super high power that can essentially compete with this, with Intel's 286 chip. We need almost that good level of performance, but it has to be super low cost because like we're making this ourselves. We don't have the global resources of Intel behind us. What can we do? And so this team led by Sophie Wilson, who was and is an incredible computer scientist, one of the most important, contributions to all of computing as we see that she implements here. She'd heard about a paper out of, ironically, back in the Bay Area in California, out of UC Berkeley that had just come out about detailing what a project would look like for a reduced instruction set computer. Now, this is going to be a technical interlude, but it's super important to understanding, again, what becomes probably one of, if not the most important underlying technology company for the whole industry right now. So what are instruction sets? Ben, do you want to talk about this?
I will. And I first off want to take a step back here and make a disclaimer that we acknowledge that we are dramatically oversimplifying technical details in this episode. We do this with apologies to those who find this too basic, but also conversely, for those who find it to be esoteric on the other side of the spectrum. We are going to dust off the computer science degrees here and well,
I would say in true, Apple fashion here, this show is, and really the whole technology industry is the intersection of, engineering and the liberal of technology and the liberal arts. And that's what this is here. You're about to get a dose of technology.
May we be so bold. So before we dive into what is a reduced instruction set architecture, it's worth diving in what came before it, the complex instruction set architecture. And even before that, like, what the heck is an instruction set architecture? Like, why? Okay. So the instruction set architecture, you can think about as sort of the language of a chip. So a CPU has a variety of components on it, places where you can store information, places that temporarily hold information, places that tick the clock and move all the information one step forward in the process. And the way that it does all of this, saying, hey, go store that over there in that register, or hey, advance the whole clock, one step so that we can move this thing out of that register and push it off into memory or something like that. All of this happens.
And this is all what's happening inside the CPU in your computer, whatever device you're using right now.
Yeah, and at what speed? I don't know, like hundreds of thousands of times per second or millions of times per second. I mean, this happens incredibly fast, but it requires a language. It's sort of like its own programming language, and it's the instructions or the instruction set that the chip itself speaks. And so originally, the way that this was done was with CISC. And this was really the complex instruction set computer where instructions were, well, first of all, there were a lot of them. They were very, very sort of malleable. So they could do things like take multiple clock cycles to achieve a complex instruction.
This is like multiplying numbers, dividing, transforming numbers, all sorts of stuff.
Right. It would sort of do as much as it possibly could using the hardware circuitry. So it was really about, hey, this is going to be powerful hardware, so we're going to write a language that leverages all the very unique and powerful components that are actually on this chip. It could have, without getting too complex on these things, variable length instructions. So you couldn't rely on a set of assumptions about how long each instruction was going to take time-wise or was going to take up space-wise. So while it provided the programmer with a lot of power, it required a tremendous amount of sort of tight coupling with the hardware and complexity.
Yeah, and that translated to, at the time, everybody was thinking about number of transistors on the chip and associated memory that you needed to support the data that was going through all those transistors. Over time, and much more importantly, that would translate into power consumption. The CISC complex instruction set architecture computers, that is what Intel processors are. So Intel, like the set of instructions that is CISC, comes from Intel, and all Intel x86 processors are CISC complex instruction set computers. What Acorn at this time and Sophie Wilson, what they were picking up on out of academia was like, maybe there's a different approach to how you could build these processors.
I've actually never seen this written about as low-end disruption, but this is almost like classic low-end disruption where we say, what if we punt on a lot of those things that everyone previously thought was important and solve a problem with a very different set of constraints where it's got to be cheaper It's going to be less sophisticated, so there's less components on the chips. There's going to be less instructions that are available for the programmer to use. And really, it's not the programmer, it's actually the compiler that translates what the programmer writes into the instruction set. But it's really rethinking it from the ground up and saying, what if every instruction could only take one clock cycle? It could work on sort of a variety of different components, but making this really hardcore set of assumptions. It was this software-centric design instead of a hardware-centric design, so it was kind of portable. It could use a very limited number of addresses and limited number of registers. So in all aspects of it, it's sort of worse. You could sort of describe it as worse in every way. But I'll turn it back to you, David. How does that actually end up being disruptive and better?
What one of the original team members who worked with Sophie on designing this would write later, you could think of it as it's the 80-20 rule, right? Like these risk reduced instruction set architecture machines, processors that Acorn designed, they only could do about 80% of the instructions that CISC could do, but they did those instructions, they executed them much, much faster, like on one clock cycle instead of multiple clock cycles per instruction. So when you needed to do those complex, other instructions that were in the 20%, the chips would slow down hugely. But the thing was, you just didn't do them that much. So like the 80% that you were doing most of the time, like they were really, really good at.
You were spending a lot of money to build this sort of sophisticated components onto the chips so they could handle those things that you just weren't doing that often.
To put some numbers on this, the 2286, the famous Intel processor that started the x86 line, the first one of those had about 134,000 transistors on the chip. The Acorn processor, the RISC processor, when they finish it, has only about 30,000 transistors on the chip. And yet, because of this 80-20 rule, it actually has better performance than the 2286. So it's like way cheaper to make, and it has actually better performance for most applications. This is like huge. This is a huge leap forward in engineering and computer science. So they do this. Sophie and the team create this like in a very short period of time. They decide that they're going to call this chip the Acorn Reduced Instruction Set Computer Machine, ARM. Boom. And the world changes, but not just yet.
The groundwork was laid for the world to change, but it wasn't yet. It's not like, here we are in the 80s and Intel starts doing poorly. These things take a long time.
All right, listeners, now is a great time to tell you about a longtime friend of the show, Vanta. AI has scrambled the whole security picture. It used to be that you proved that you were secure once a year, an audit or a static PDF, then everyone would nod and you're done. But in an AI-first world, that doesn't hold up anymore.
Yep, your risk surface changes every week now. A vendor turns on an AI feature or someone writes in a new model without telling IT, and your posture is different than it was last week, let alone at your last audit. Vanta's own research found that around 70% of companies have this quote-unquote shadow AI running with no security review at all.
Right. And that's where Vanta comes in. They're the leading agentic trust platform, meaning they've built the thing that closes the gap. And the way that they close that gap is Vanta Agent. Think of it as a GRC engineer, that's governance, risk, and compliance, except that it's software and it doesn't sleep. It finds the issues, drafts the fixes, and cuts the time that you'd spend on vendor assessments in half.
In half! Which is exactly why more than 16,000 companies today run on Vanta. Companies like Ramp, Cursor, and Snowflake all stay audit ready and catch the risks that crop up between audits across every vendor, every AI tool, the whole environment.
And that's the real value. Trust has to be continuous now, which is why Vanta automates your security, your compliance, and the work to earn and prove trust. We're huge fans of Vanta over here, and literally hundreds of acquired listeners have become Vanta customers at their companies over the years. So you can get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/acquired. That's VANTA.com/acquired for $1,000 off, and just tell them that Ben and David sent you.
This is really interesting. We've just went deep technically on what's going on. There's this huge innovation. Why didn't the first ARM chip and the Archimedes that launched in 1987 with this chip, why didn't it blow the IBM PC and the IBM PC clones out of the water? Well, this is like a market forces thing. So by the time it launched, Microsoft was on the scene, right? And DOS was around, and DOS ran on Intel x86 architecture. And then eventually Windows would run on top of DOS and started getting so much market share, and all the applications that all these business and professional users needed, they were all running on DOS. DOS didn't run on Archimedes or the RISC architecture computers. So for a long time, for the whole entire PC wave, everybody in the industry knew that other types of architecture, RISC-based architecture, which ARM pioneered, but the Motorola Power PC, like what Apple was using at the time, it was fundamentally better technology. But because of the duopoly between the Wintel duopoly between Microsoft and Intel, it's almost like nobody really cared.
It's important to understand what role a compiler plays in all this. So why is it that they couldn't just run Windows, run DOS on, these better chips? Until recently, and there's been a lot of really great advancements in really commercializing this sort of crossover technology recently, it was thought to be basically impossible to make your programming language, which is written in C and using sort of the standard C compiler, work well across different chipsets, especially when you have so many layers of translation from the application to the operating system to the kernel, eventually getting actually executed on a chip. And there's a lot of sort of assumptions that are baked into the programming language, to the compiler, to the chip, and sort of assumptions around those things being coupled together. And so it's sort of much more difficult than you would think to rip the layers apart and say, well, we're just going to run this on a completely different architecture. Sophie and team did this amazing thing of coming up with, for a different scenario, a much better instruction set architecture. However, basically nothing would run on it, and they needed to kind of think about the world in a whole different way and convince everyone else that they should think about the world in a whole different way in order to leverage that innovation they created.
Which wasn't going to happen during the PC wave because, the network effect flywheel was like in full swing at this point. You've got Lotus, you've got, all these application providers writing for, as we talked about, writing for Microsoft, which only worked on Intel. So boom, there you go. Two, multi-$100 billion companies come out of that wave, and Acorn is left in the dust. So as you would think, they're kind of in a bleak position here now. They've put a ton of resources into this new Archimedes project that they think is going to be, they're going to ride this next PC wave. They're getting knocked off the wave. This is probably the end of the company, right? And actually, it is. Acorn itself ends up getting acquired by an Italian computer company called Olivetti around this time, and they end up just exiting the PC business altogether. But there was something also that we haven't talked about yet that was pretty interesting about these ARM processors that they were building. And this is another just like crazy thing of history that like they didn't expect it. So when they developed the ARM processors, when Sophie and the team developed it, the goal was same level of performance, ended up being slightly better for a lot less cost. Like put fewer transistors on the chip because that's going to cost less. But what it turned out, they would put these processors into the PCs, into the Archimedes prototypes. It turned out they sometimes would function even without a power supply. And the team at first, they were like, this is like crazy. What is there, like a ghost in this machine? Like, how is this processor working without a power supply?
Was it like what, residual?
Well, it was without a dedicated power supply to the processor. And this is like crazy because at the time, like, CPUs were the most power hungry components of the whole, PC. So like there was power running into the machine, but just not a dedicated line into the CPU. And it turned out that because there were so many fewer transistors on the chip, it needed much less electricity and power to be able to run, even at really high performance. And so it was actually just sucking power from the other components in the circuit on the chip, and it was still able to function. And they were like, whoa, this is crazy. So it turned out after Acorn gets acquired by Olivetti, one of the two original co-founders, this guy Herman Hauser, who also was a Cambridge physics PhD, he leaves and he's thinking, which a couple of people are thinking in technology at the time, PCs are here, but what's the next wave going to be? This is like, people thinking about VR right now or a couple of years ago, like we're in the middle of the mobile wave, but like what's next?
And it's worth sort of like simplifying what we have right now. We have a thing that uses a completely different architecture that's not really compatible with everything the rest of the world uses, but is much cheaper to make, high performance, and requires less power.
And so Herman's like, I think mobile computing, like everybody's all about desktop PC computing right now, but like think about everything you could do if you had a computer around in the world with you, like not tethered to a desktop. He goes and he starts a company to try and pursue this vision of computing. He calls it the Active Book Company, and he wants to focus on making PDAs, personal digital assistants, which are mobile devices. And what's super important for mobile devices? Battery life.
And this is 1988?
This is 1988.
Yeah, so battery life is very important.
Right. Very important.
I think lithium-ion batteries get like 15% better every year. So compound that back 30 years, like they were bad.
Yeah, right. Like how long does your iPhone last today? Like not long enough, imagine back then. But there are just not that many people in the world that are thinking like 1988, shoot, like I think I got my first computer at that point. I was like 4 years old and, it was a massive, like, hunk of metal that sat on my desk and probably used, half of the house's power supply. Like,
well, it was an x86. What do you expect?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So Herman, he's focusing on PDAs and he's like, what I think could make this happen is these processors we developed back at ARM. So he goes back to the chip team at ARM and to Sophie and he's like, hey, can you like rework this whole thing to really optimize for power consumption while still maintaining this high performance? Sophie's like, yeah, we can do that. And they do, and it works. And they start producing these chips with their longtime silicon partner, VLSI, because again, Acorn didn't have the resources to be manufacturing their own semiconductors at this point. So they used a fabricator, VLSI, to make their silicon. Well, at the same time, who else is thinking about PDAs out there? This is 1988. Apple. And this is where the other Newton, not Isaac, comes into play. So Apple's under, Steve Jobs is left at this point. He's getting kicked out of the company. John Sculley is CEO, and John Sculley's, great white whale is the same thing as Herman Hauser. It's the personal digital assistant. Sculley gets like such a bad rap, but like he actually had, a vision that like very few people in computing, did at the time. Not even Steve. I mean, Steve was off doing Next, right? Like he's trying to make a super powerful workstation.
Come on, what's the difference between being wrong and being too early?
Nothing. But good for the world that he was wrong and too early, because Sculley puts Larry Tesler at Apple on this Newton project, which is his pet project. And Larry is amazing. So Larry came from Xerox PARC. He was like an OG original computer guy. He invented copy paste. He's like leading the SWAT team within Apple that's going to build this, computing platform of the future. He knows he needs a low power, high performance chip. He first goes to AT&T, which was working on a low power chip called the Hobbit, which you can't make this stuff up. Just like you would expect from a chip from AT&T called the Hobbit in 1988. It sucked. Like it was terrible on every dimension. And this is fun. I think one of my carve outs a few episodes ago was Jerry Kaplan's book Startup. And Jerry, he was the founder of the Go Corporation here in Silicon Valley, which was also trying to work on a PDA at the time. They had ended up getting acquired into AT&T and formed the backbone of the Hobbit. Anyway, Larry gets introduced. He's chatting with people in the silicon industry, trying to find better chips. He's chatting one day with someone at VLSI, and they're like, hey, we've got this partner, Acorn, over in the UK, and like they're not doing too well. They were trying to compete with you guys in the telephone directory, but one of their founders is doing something kind of interesting right now, also in mobile computing, and they have this chip that's working pretty well. You might want to check it out. And Larry's like, I need to have this right now. So he goes over, he meets with Sophie and the engineering team over there. And he's like, this is great. This is the chip we need here at Apple for the Newton. But I can't license this tech from Acorn and Olivetti. Like, we're competitors. We need to create a structure that can work here. So they architect a deal with Olivetti and VLSI. They spin off the chip division of Acorn into a new separate company that they can then license this processor design from. They do it super fast. Within like 6 weeks of when they get together, they've spun out the company into a new division, a new totally separate company called ARM.
This blew my freaking mind that ARM was started as a JV with Apple on the Newton.
It's crazy. So Apple invests $1.5 million into the company. So Acorn and Olivetti are bringing the engineering group. They assign 12 engineers to the new company. VLSI is the silicon fabricator partner. They get an equity stake. Apple brings the money. They get 43% of the company for $1.5 million. Again, talk about a dilutive seed round.
To blow out the irony of this, I'm going to jump forward just to foreshadow, like, all of the A-series chips are ARM processors. Like, the thing that is so differentiating about the iPhone, I mean, there's a lot of things, but one of the things that they're just years ahead on is being able to have some of the best processors in the world, all based on the ARM instruction set architecture. We will get to how these companies have sort of parted ways over time, but oh my God, they were actually involved in the founding of it.
It is no overstatement at all to say that without the Newton project within Apple, ARM as a company would not exist. The phones, whatever device you're listening to this on right now would look very different. You might have it plugged into a wall, which you almost assuredly don't. It's crazy. It's crazy. So these 12 engineers, they do the spinoff. They get the $1.5 million from Apple. These 12 engineers go down the street in Cambridge. They set up shop in a converted barn. And they bring in this guy, Robin Saxby, who had been an executive at Motorola, to be the CEO of the new company. And they get to work with Apple. They're working super closely. They're taking the core RISC processor technology that they own, but it needs to be super customized and fit into a chipset that's going to work within this small device, the Newton. So they're working hand in hand with Apple to create it, and they make the processor. It's the ARM 610, and that goes into the Newton. And every Newton, the first Newtons that shipped, all had the ARM 610 processor in them, and then it would get upgraded over time, but it would power every Newton. Now, ironically, remember Herman Hauser, the original Acorn co-founder who had started ActiveBook and kind of set all these wheels in motion. He ends up selling ActiveBook to AT&T, of all people, in 1991. And AT&T merges it in with the assets of Go that it had acquired, which is now EO within AT&T. Only they could do something like this. They force it to start using the Hobbit processor. And of course, I don't know, I think these PDAs did end up shipping, but like they were so bad and it completely fails in the market.
David, the rabbit holes that you went down for this episode, I believe achieve new heights.
Oh man, this is so much fun. Speaking of failure though, I mean, AT&T was like obviously stupid with, the Hobbit processor, and go read the book Startup. Like, it's so good about all the ridiculousness that went on around this. The Newton also, of course, famously fails, even though they have the ARM processor, and it's just too early. Like, the world isn't ready for this.
So catch me up. Like, I didn't research this part at all. What happens to ARM post Newton failure?
So when the Newton actually gets around to shipping in 1993, it's now been over 2 years that ARM's working exclusively with Apple. The Newton ships, and like it's clear pretty early, like there aren't going to be enough unit sales here that like the project's
it's like the HomePod of PDAs.
Yeah, it's the HomePod of PDAs. So this is where Robin, the CEO from Motorola who came in, this is where he makes a couple really, really brilliant decisions. And we've talked about in previous episodes that like one of my tech themes has been recently that like when you can marry a huge technology wave with a key business model innovation, like we talked about in the Tencent episode, like that's when something magical happens. And so what did Robin do? He was like, okay, well, we need to work with other partners here. We can't be dependent on just Apple and just Newton to buy a lot of chips from us, because they're not gonna pay us a lot in licensing fees here. But he's also realized that like part of the magic of what made this processor really work wasn't just that like ARM designed this chip and like handed it over whole cloth to Apple. It was that they really embedded with the engineering teams on the Newton and made something like pretty customized that worked specifically for this device. And so he's like, I bet we could do this with lots of people, and we give them this core processor, this core RISC processor technology. We could embed within their teams, and we can help them develop essentially custom silicon for their use cases. And what is really interesting here, like if we could create a business model that aligns with this, what if we say like, okay, when we do this, you pay us an upfront licensing fee for the rights to our core RISC technology, and you pay us for, our engineering time for embedding with you, and we'll make money on that. But let's get aligned on like actually shipping units.
Yeah, we want you to ship a bunch of units.
We want you to ship a bunch of units. So how about we take a small royalty on every device you ship that has our technology in it? And then at the time, like this is like, okay, somewhat interesting. Like how many devices could potentially ship that are like mobile computing devices?
So ARM gets paid 3 times. Like they get the license fee from, hey, you get to use the ARM technology. Our this instruction set architecture is one that you have the privilege of using on your chip. And there's sort of 2 ways that can work. Either they design the chip for that manufacturer, or they say, here, you feel like you're a good designer, and this is sort of how Apple's relationship works today. You use our instruction set and you do it. So then they get paid the second time for actually embedding with them. That's their sort of software and services line of business. And then they get that third time, which is every unit sold, they get a tiny little piece of the cost of each CPU that's shipped out.
Yeah. Well, it turns out, this is one of the things that makes the technology industry magical. A very, very tiny piece of a pie that is literally almost 100 times bigger than every person in the world combined, which the number of devices in the world is at this point, turns out to be a very, very large slice of pie.
Do you know how many ARM chips have shipped to date?
I do, but why don't you go for it?
130 billion.
Yeah, that's billion with a B. And
that's a lot of pennies.
And think about that. Those are ARM chips, each of which is the core processor in a device. So that is 130 billion devices.
Not necessarily true. Lots of devices have...
Well, many devices have multiple chips within them, yes. But still, like, it's okay, reduce that by, a factor of 4 or 5 or whatever. Like, that's still like way more than there are people on Earth.
Yeah, that was a thoughtful first contract to sign, that they get some upside on units shipped.
Yeah. And what's also cool, so again, like, I think this is such a cool example, ARM is, of technology and business model playing together and like making each other better. So like obviously there's the financial aspect of this. What's interesting on the technology side too, because ARM now, like all the other chip companies, take Intel for example, they're like, use our, Atom 7 whatever chip or Core I blah blah blah. I am going to give you this chip, you are going to put it in your device. Because ARM is like, no, we're aligned with you. We want you to make the best products and ship the best devices, and we'll embed our technology and our teams with you. We can collaborate on designing it however you want. So this is what really, it's ARM and this model that starts to enable systems on a chip to be really take off. So what is a system on a chip? Like back in the PC days that we were talking about earlier, a system, a PC, you had a motherboard, you had a processor, you had a graphics card, you had a sound card, you had I remember plugging all this stuff in and building my own PCs back in the day.
Yeah, man, put it all in your PCIe slots and call
exactly.
it a day.
Oh, man. Incredible. Was that PCI Express, right? Yes.
Yeah, that was the latter generation.
That was like, oh man, crazy. So people start to realize, especially in a mobile environment, like, well, what if you could just put all of that just on one chip instead of having separate chips and buses and motherboards and whatnot. ARM's like, yeah, cool. Like, put our processor in one chip as part of it. Like, we'll help you with that. And so Apple now with the core, the A57, bionic Superman chip. That's what this is. Yeah. All the Samsung chips, Qualcomm chips, TI chips, like every, chip. Your phones have multiple chips, but like at the core, most of the technology is being done on one actual piece of silicon.
This was the transition from the era of sort of the just discrete CPU to system on a chip, which is, where we are today.
Yep. And so actually that same year in 1993, and like, again, so much kudos to ARM, the company, and to Robin, the CEO, for turning this around. The same year that the Newton chips and they realized this isn't going to work, they signed a landmark deal with Texas Instruments to provide the core of a processor that Nokia has contracted with TI to go into the Nokia 610 or 6110. We'll try and put a link to this in the show notes. Once you see this phone, you are going to remember this phone. This was like, I think the first cell phone I had was like a variant on this. Yeah, this is the candy bar phone. This is the first major consumer GSM phone that is sold certainly in America and all over the world. And this is what starts, the kink in the curve of cell phone shipments that ends up, with smartphones and where we are today.
David was talking earlier about why, these ARM chips were, even though they were better in a lot of ways, they couldn't penetrate the duopoly of Microsoft and Intel and Windows running there. You can start to see now, the software that ran on that Nokia phone that I'm sure everyone played Snake on is nothing like the software that ran on Macs or on Windows.
Snake was like the killer app because ARM processors were literally like before the Nokia 6110, the processors in cell phones weren't good enough to even run Snake. But now you have this low power, high performance processor that can run games, right? And you can like draw a direct line from there to, Farmville to Clash of Clans to everything.
Right. The bridge that hasn't gotten crossed yet is how we went from that, which really, that phone, it felt more like an embedded device than really like phones as we know today. And phones today are effectively PCs. And if you think about the work that was done to create the first version of iOS, it was really to strip down Mac OS. And people always harp a lot on this like strip down Mac OS to create iOS, and it still uses the same Darwin kernel and all that stuff. But the other crazy piece of work that had to be done to bring a computer operating system to these mobile phones was adapting it for the ARM chipset. Like to bring PC operating systems to something that would operate on these chips that like weren't getting a lot of power and had completely different instruction set. The fact that iOS and Android works the way it does today on this chip that was nothing like what they were originally architected for is mind-blowing.
It's interesting. I didn't put two and two together till right now, but I strongly suspect, if you think about like, why did Microsoft miss mobile? There are lots of reasons, right? Like cultural, what have you, technology, but actually like this specific technology reason I think could be one of the major points that, Microsoft had Windows Mobile, right? And Microsoft had Windows CE and embedded Windows and whatnot, right? But like those were
completely different code base,
right? That wasn't Microsoft Windows because Microsoft Windows and DOS only ran on complex instruction set architectures, right? They're not going to re-architect that whole thing to run on RISC architecture. Now,
they do now.
Yeah, they do now. But at the time,
last
right?
couple of years,
at the as smartphones were taking off, why could Apple do this? Apple had always been much more open about their architectures that Mac OS ran on, that OS X ran on, right? And like,
did they already do the transition from the Motorola processors, the Motorola Power PCs to...
they had to port into the x86 Intel with OS X, right? So they were much less wedded to, and open to porting their Mac OS and OS X into different architectures. And indeed, they had this Newton DNA as well.
For folks who don't know specifically what we're talking about, so the iPhone came out in 2007, which, holy God, they put Mac OS on an ARM chip. 2 years before that, the thing that we're referencing here is in a very Jobsian keynote that continues to go down in history as just an amazing piece of showmanship. Steve Jobs came out and said, so we're changing the chips that are in all the new Macs away from the PowerPC that we've been using to using Intel, which of course was so dramatized. And Paul Otellini walked out on stage and, oh my God, Apple is using Intel. Look at all the old wars that there's still, the ground is burning from all the carnage and wreckage of those old wars. And here's what's happening now. And Steve, of course, says, and the crazy thing is that you guys don't even realize it's been that way for a year. And all the operating systems dating back, a year or 2 years ago.
I didn't know it was multiple years. Yeah.
Yeah, have been capable of doing this, and you guys just didn't know it. So go buy yourself a new computer, and all your old stuff will work on it. David, you're right. I think that did give them sort of the confidence to say, like, well, I guess we could start re-architecting our operating system to work on yet another chipset.
Well, and of course, at that point in time, the iPhone project was well underway, but probably getting close to shipping, because I think it was 2006, right, when that happened.
I wonder how similar those efforts were.
Yeah, interesting. Well, anyway, to rewind back to ARM. So this is happening. They do this TI deal. The Nokia 6110 launches. Things are all basically up into the right indefinitely from then for ARM. So at the end of 1997, ARM is doing over 25 million pounds in revenue, and they're profitable. They do a dual IPO, both on the London Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ. Because remember, they have British shareholders, Italian shareholders, and in Apple, American shareholders. On April 17th, 1998, they priced the IPO at £5.75 per share, which translates to a market cap of 264 million pounds. Now, the exchange rate was stronger back then, but still, my God, I wish I could have invested at the IPO. It grows hugely throughout the tech bubble, especially. And this is so awesome. I can't believe this is going to be like a footnote in this episode, but like, I want to highlight here, this saves Apple. The ARM IPO, had it not happened, very likely Apple would have gone bankrupt, because this is 1998. Steve Jobs had just come back into Apple. Scully was ousted. The company's bleeding cash. Like, they are like seriously facing bankruptcy.
And it's a decade later, but they still own that share of ARM?
No. They start liquidating the ARM shares, and thankfully they don't liquidate all at the IPO. They start selling slowly over a couple of years as the ARM stock price is going crazy. Apple, remember, they invested $1.5 million. They make $792 million in profit from selling their ARM stock over the next couple of years. And literally that is what saves the company. Like, it would have gone bankrupt without that.
Imagine being an analyst. Like, now there's an army of Apple analysts, but like then, imagine being an Apple analyst and you're like, okay, yet another quarter where all of their, it wouldn't even be operating income, but all of their profit is coming from liquidating this thing that's going to run out.
I mean, that was literally what kept the company afloat. Kind of amazing while Steve was, preparing what would become the iMac, and consolidating the product lines, and ironically killing the Newton. So when the tech bubble bursts, when the internet bubble bursts and the telecom bubble bursts in 2001, ARM, of course, takes a blip and shipments basically like plateau for, a year, maybe not even. But again, like, this is such a huge wave. Like, by 2002, they pick back up to the point where in 2010, ARM partners are now shipping over 5 billion devices every year. Again, so almost as many people as there are on the planet, ARM's partners are shipping devices. So like, these aren't just, of course, cell phones. These are, microwaves. These are refrigerators. These are cars. Like, cars have a lot of ARM chips in them. These are sensors and devices, anything that needs a low power, high performance embedded processor.
All right, listeners. Now is a great time to thank our longtime friend of the show, ServiceNow. If you are running a large enterprise, AI agents are likely spread across every team, and deploying them is no longer the hard part.
Yeah. The hard part is knowing what permissions they have, what employees are using them for, or what decisions AI is making. AI security for an enterprise at scale is not a small concern. Like, the risks are real.
Exactly. And the challenge with AI is governing it, securing it, measuring it, and making sure that it actually delivers value. That is why ServiceNow built the AI Control Tower.
Yep. AI Control Tower gives enterprises a single place to see, manage, govern, and optimize AI across the entire business. And it works with any AI, not just theirs. Every device on your network, every permission across every system, every AI agent visible and secure in one place.
And ServiceNow can do this because they've spent more than 20 years building the operational backbone of the enterprise, the workflows, governance, approvals, security controls, and institutional knowledge that power how work actually gets done across IT, HR, customer service, finance, and security.
ServiceNow already runs more than 100 billion workflows annually and trillions of transactions for more than 85% of the Fortune 500. So when companies need a place to govern AI at enterprise scale, they're building on a platform at the center of how their business already operates.
And in a future that isn't going to be one AI, it's going to be thousands of AI agents working across every function of the company. But the question is, who's managing them all?
So if you're trying to turn AI ambition into real business outcomes and make it work safely, securely, at scale, go check out servicenow.com/acquired and tell them that Ben and David sent you. So typically, this would be where we would, wrap up our history and facts.
Companies just growing nicely.
However,
it's post-IPO,
we'd grade the IPO. We'd say like, man, if only Apple had held onto their shares and didn't need to liquidate. Like,
it's kind of crazy. I'm not sure we would be doing this episode if SoftBank hadn't bought them, because it is sort of like, if you've bared with us this long in this episode, you probably agree it's this sort of obscure technology company that has an absolutely inane business model. Before moving forward, David, it is worth putting a fine point on the business model where they don't manufacture chips. About half of their business, or a little bit less, I think, comes from designing the chips and then licensing those out. And then, they have this large component of their business that is just licensing the instruction set architecture. Like, they have now managed, through the value they've created through the intellectual property, but also the lock-in they've created by building an ecosystem around their instruction set. They just license their instruction set, and it means they get a cut of all chips that are manufactured using their IP. And that sort of continues to blow my mind, that somebody doesn't say like, sorry, that's not your lunch. Like, and this isn't like a trivial amount of money. I think it's something like, if you look at the iPhone, I think they make like 35 cents per unit. It's something like 1% to 2% of the chip selling price, depending on which of their business models it was manufactured under. But like 35 cents of every, A series chip. Why is it that they've managed to hold on and actually get a cut of every single chip manufactured?
I think it's probably two things. One, they continue to have truly excellent processor and chip engineering and design talent, right? So they truly are one of the world-class, best processor design companies in the world, at a time where advances in both performance and power consumption for processors are more important than ever. But I think also it's the same reason why the Wintel duopoly existed, right? Like, even though Apple is more flexible about moving architectures than, Microsoft was back in the day, Android and iOS run on RISC architecture chipsets. Are they really going to re-architect them for something else? There is no other thing to re-architect to.
Yeah, that's true. You would have to come up with your own instruction set, build your own
set of compilers to enable operating systems.
So Apple does a lot of this anyway. Like, Apple's one of the companies that actually could probably uniquely do it, because they could write their own instruction set. I mean, this is like way bleeding into tech themes and random future forecasting, but like, they could write a new compiler, build it into Xcode, make it so that every app that's compiled just works on their new chipset that's not ARM-based that they launch.
Just like they did with Intel back in 2006.
Right. And it wouldn't surprise me, because they've taken over not only their own, I mean, they don't manufacture their chips, but they design their own chips. They, of course, license the ISA from ARM. But like, it does just seem like it would be one more expanding of their vertical integration to say, actually, it's going to be based on our own architecture now too. So color me in for that prediction in the next 3 years.
Interesting. And also, Apple's uniquely positioned to be the only company to do it, because Google's not going to do it with Android, because Android is a diverse ecosystem. You need ARM to be the architecture, to be the standard across the chip, TI, Qualcomm, whoever, Broadcom, all the partners you need, plus Google, plus, what have you.
Google with Android is kind of the Microsoft. It's actually a little bit worse of a position than Microsoft because you can't guarantee that it's an Intel chip. It's probably a Qualcomm chip, but it could be a bunch of things.
Mm-hmm. Well,
all right. So
to pull back from tech themes, back to our
let's
story.
talk about the actual acquisition because that's the name of the podcast.
This is like such a schizophrenic episode because until now,
I
literally
keep pulling us into the future.
This is so important, this company and this technology, and I hope we've done a good enough job communicating that. But this is like a hardcore technology episode. But now we're gonna grab the wheel and shift back to like crazy, James Bond style SoftBank and Masa. Okay, so this brings us to 2016. All is well in the world. ARM is winning, based in Cambridge, doing great engineering, working with partners, got their great business model.
Did about 1.6 billion in revenue the previous year.
Yep. The stock price is having a huge run because the financial community is starting to wake up to this fact that like, oh, hey, if I want to ride the mobile wave and I want exposure to this, ARM is like a really good way to do it.
Yep. We shipped 15 billion units in 2015. Like things are happening.
Yep. So thanks to Fast Company and Katrina Brooker and friend of the show, David Lidsky, and their great piece on Masa and SoftBank that just came out, we know what happens here. So it's summer of 2016, and Masa is hosting a dinner for tech industry luminaries at his amazing 9-acre estate in Woodside, California, which is like a super Tony community, right outside Palo Alto, right over 280. This is where Steve Jobs' mansion was that he never built out. This is where Larry Ellison's whole compound is, and Masa has like an equally amazing compound there. He's hosting a dinner. One of the attendees at the dinner is Simon Sagars, who had joined ARM back in 1991, right after the spin out. He was an engineer and he was the 16th employee. At this point, he's risen through the ranks over the years. He's become the CEO, and he's kind of like, his job is like steward of this ecosystem. And like, obviously everyone uses ARM, but like SoftBank is an important partner because they're one of the world's biggest telecom operators. And so like, he wants SoftBank to, make sure that they understand how important ARM is in the chipset of the phones that they're selling. It's like, okay, great. I'll go to this dinner. I'll, hang out with Masa. So they're sitting there at dinner, and Masa starts like focusing on Simon, and he starts asking him a bunch of questions about, what ARM does, what the business model is, all the various devices that ARM chips end up being used in. So Masa's like, so what exactly do you guys power? And he's like, well, we power everything. We're not just in phones, like we're in cars, we're in coffee makers, we're in refrigerators, wearables. We're starting to get into servers, like actually because of this power consumption issue, like supercomputers, like power is a limiting factor on performance. So they're starting to use us. And Masa's like, interesting. So then Masa asks him what, now has famously become the question that he asks every Vision Fund investment, which is, what would you do if money were no constraint? And Simon's just sitting there at dinner, and he's like, well, I guess we'd probably keep doing everything, but faster. And Masa's like, okay. So Simon goes back to Cambridge, back to the UK, to ARM, very different from the environment he was just in. He's sitting there a couple days later, back in Cambridge, and he gets a call from Masa in Tokyo. And in typical Masa fashion, he's like, I need to see you right away. And not just you, but I also need to see ARM chairman Stuart Chambers, chairman of the board.
And this is the best part of David's reporting here.
This is great. Well, it's we alluded to this in the carve out on the last show. So there's one problem, which is that Stuart is on vacation and he's on a yacht in the Turkish Mediterranean. But like Masa doesn't, like, yachts in the Turkish Med, like that's his ball game. Like that doesn't faze him. He's like, okay, well, hang on, I'm going to call him. He calls him and he's like, I need you to dock your boat in Marmay, Turkey, which is like a resort town on the Mediterranean coast in Turkey. Masa then sends a private jet to Cambridge, picks up Simon. He jumps on his own jet. They all converge in Marmay. I don't know if it's Marmay, French pronunciation, or Marmays in Turkey. Masa buys out an entire restaurant with like a view overlooking the marina. So there's nobody else in there. They all converge, the three of them in the restaurant. And they sit down and Masa's like, I want to buy you guys. And I'm going to offer you $32 billion, which was almost a 50% premium to where they were trading at that moment in time. And I want to do it now.
Like when there's a public to public acquisition, it sometimes is like 20, 25%. We've seen up to 30% in more typical situations. But like, I think it's a 43% premium.
Yep. Typically with, public to public acquisitions too, there's a lot of back and forth and there's investment bankers involved. And like, it's very rare that you get an Instagram style, like done.
They closed it in 2 weeks.
Yep. They closed they announced, they got board approval and they announced within 2 weeks, ARM to remain an independent division within SoftBank. SoftBank's going to pay $32 billion to buy the whole thing. The market loves it. It gets shareholder approval and it's done. This, as we alluded to at the top of the show, it was this model. I'm sure Masa was already starting to think about the Vision Fund, but this deal and this vision of computing everywhere and what it'll enable becomes really the prototype for what SoftBank is now doing with the Vision Fund. So much so that the next year in 2017, when they actually get the fund set up, SoftBank Corporate sells a 25% stake in ARM at cost to the Vision Fund. So the Vision Fund takes $8 billion right off the bat and buys 25% of ARM from SoftBank Corporate.
So what do you think went on with that? Why?
Well, I think Masa was always thinking about this as an investment. It was just that before the Vision Fund, the only way you had to invest was through SoftBank balance sheet. Yeah.
I mean, now there's a ticking time clock because the Vision Fund has a 12-year fund lifetime. So it's not like he can hold it indefinitely now. Like at some point, they have to either sell that back to SoftBank, which I'm sure Masa doesn't want to do as someone who controls both entities. Probably wants to, in the next 5 to 7 years, get a nice return on ARM and sell it to someone else. So we haven't seen the last of this yet.
Well, I think most likely, and this is what people started talking about after the transfer, the 25% transfer, into the Vision Fund, is re-IPO it. I think that's the most likely outcome. But what's interesting, and this also speaks to the Vision Fund strategy. So in 2016, when SoftBank acquired the company, there were only about 4,000 people working at the company, which on the one hand is a lot of people. On the other hand, like that's a lot less than Uber. That's a lot less than, I think less than Airbnb at this point. Like for a company that old and that was like literally the foundation of, all technology at that point. I mean, I think they have a 96% market share of all smartphone and embedded devices. That's not a lot of people. In the 2 plus 2.5 years since then, ARM has hired over 2,000 people. So they've grown by more than 50% headcount since they couldn't have done that if they were a public company because they're now losing money. They're now net income negative. But Masa, again, it's his question. What would you do if money were no object?
Are they net income negative? So here's what I was looking at that. Their operating margin was 52%. Their operating margin at the time of acquisition, their operating margin now is 24%. Even though they've grown from 1.6 billion in revenue to 1.8 billion in revenue, their EBITDA dropped 40% despite the revenue increase. So I'm not sure if they're losing money, but it's interesting. They're selling a lot more devices. They're only make a little bit more money, and their profits significantly dropped.
Interesting.
And their margin dropped.
I just pulled it up again. I said there's an article that they posted a loss of 200 million in, I believe, 2018, which could be for lots of reasons. And obviously that's not operating margin, that's net income.
The drum that they're beating and telling investors right now is, hold on, guys, we are way investing in growth and it will pay off. And then we're going to do something about it when it does.
And what's interesting, they still do quarterly presentations on company results. what they're talking about now is how they're investing heavily into the next computing waves. So ARM has started now making designs and devices, chips that are dedicated for AI use cases, but also for like autonomous vehicle use cases. So you think about, Intel bought Mobileye for, I think, $17 billion. And Mobileye makes chipsets for cars, and in particular for computer vision for driver assistance and eventually fully autonomous use cases. ARM is getting heavily into that market as well as all sorts of, embedded computing.
Yeah, it's interesting because the stated reason at the time of purchase, and at some point here we'll breeze through the other sections of the show, but at the time of purchase, the drum they were beating was it's IoT, that the Internet of Things is blowing up, and because there's going to be an ARM device in much more than your phone, it's going to be in all these other things that are communicating with the internet around you. That's why we believe that the growth is. It's like Masa believed that there was some growth that was not priced in. That he believed was going to expand, the market for IoT devices was going to expand even greater than the public market investors who owned ARM believed, or at least that there would be some reason to believe that it would be generating more future cash flows. And it was IoT, and it's interesting to see, 2 years later now on some of their investor relations stuff, so that it really is more about the connected car and AI chips. So certainly their devices shipped has continued to be a really great story. They went from, I think 2015 they were 15 billion, and now in I think at the end of when was this?
2017 they did over 21 billion.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at too. Their exponential growth continues to be really excellent, but it is interesting. It's like on what thesis do you have to believe in a specific thesis about where there will be more CPUs, specifically low power ARM CPUs, or do you just say, look, I don't have to believe anything in particular. I'm just pretty sure that these things are going to continue to be more and more everywhere.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm in the latter camp, but should we jump to acquisition category?
Yeah,
it's so funny. We were setting this up all along for an IPO narrative, but boom, acquisition.
Because we've done so many recently.
I know.
Business line.
For sure. Not even.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
I don't think SoftBank does anything else quite like ARM. So business line, and it's fully independent. Okay. What would have happened otherwise? This is an interesting one. I feel like this is the first interesting one in a while.
I have two interesting points to make on this one. So do you know how Masa got the cash to buy ARM?
Oh, interesting. I did not research
so
that.
It was interesting. The time when he bought it was actually at a currency fluctuation due to Brexit, where the pound was not doing well. So he got a lot of blowback that you're taking advantage of a distressed asset here, and he's pounding the table saying, "No, I'm not taking advantage of a distressed asset. I really believe in this, and I was just waiting for the cash to come in." Where the cash came in from was they sold $10 billion of Alibaba shares and $7 billion of Supercell shares, plus they took a $9 billion loan. And SoftBank does this pretty often. I think they take out these big credit lines to do deals like this, which makes a lot of sense why you would switch to having a freaking huge fund if you're used to these multi-billion-dollar loans to finance acquisitions.
It's like, wait a minute, you pay me for using your money instead of me paying you?
I like this arrangement. It's kind of like the ESPN deal.
Yeah, it is. Business model innovation all over the place here at Acquired.
Yeah. So my sort of theme of this section is interesting to look at the conditions upon which the deal got done. So that's condition one, which is interesting to look at. The second condition is they were a nice, deep-pocketed Switzerland that this company could actually sell to, that could finance aggressive future growth. And if you think about other people they could have sold to, it would have been value destructive, because if you sold to Apple, then Qualcomm's freaking out that they're not going to have access to their core technology anymore. And same thing in the other direction. And so the number of possible purchasers who have $30 billion or who can raise $30 billion that are willing to plow a bunch of future investment into your business that aren't strategically or I guess structurally sort of corruptive to where you want to operate in the market and in a value destructive way, pretty limited. I would say it's fortunate and value creating for the world that it landed where it did.
Well, yeah, I mean, think about like we referenced at the top of the show that in many ways this became the model for the Vision Fund. And, look, say what you will about the Vision Fund, and there are certainly, like anything, there's a balance sheet, right, of like there are positives and negatives to the ecosystem of it. This is a major positive, right? Like ARM is a public company, right? It had been a profitably operating public company for, at that point, close to 20 years. It was arguably the most important foundational computing company out there. But like, if they were to say to Wall Street, hey, we're going to massively invest in growth right now. We're going to turn net income negative. You should expect losses for the next few years while we lay the groundwork for the next waves of computing. What would happen, right? Like their stock would crash. Like they were like going to be prevented from doing that. And I think this is the core of, in some ways it's like hilariously funny, Masa's question of like, what would you do if, money were no object? But this is what he means, right? Like, and, I think in a lot of ways, like SoftBank is a great home for this company for the time being.
David and I have gotten a lot of feedback on, and listeners, we appreciate all this feedback, that we do a lot of talking about the value that accrues to the acquirer, but we do very little talking about the value created in the world by a transaction happening. This, I think, is value creating to the world if you believe that those 4,000, really brilliant physicists and PhDs and chip designers and computer scientists and technologists, if you believe that funding them, they'll continue to produce IP that will enable us to have continued innovation and do things that we previously didn't think possible because it would produce too much heat or, consume too much energy or anything like that, then yeah, I think this is incredibly value creative, both for the ARM ecosystem and for sort of anybody who uses any of their products, which is all of us.
Totally.
It's very much you get the investors you ask for. There's a very reasonable chance that the public market was not a good place to to go stand on that hill and say we're going to be bad for a while, but it'll be great eventually. It's like you need someone else to sign up for that.
Right. It's very hard to ask, once you have a certain set of investors, it's very hard to ask them something different from what you have been asking them without a change of control like this.
Yep.
Should we move into tech themes officially?
Yeah, let's do it.
Finally. I've got two, which I know I've been beating this drum for a while. One is just like this alignment that I talked about earlier of like technology model and business model. Like if you can really innovate on both of those, then like that is when really, really, really powerful things happen. Maybe in the theme of this episode and Apple and its involvement here, it is the marriage of technology and the liberal arts when you can do that. So that's one. The other one that I feel like I've been talking about more on the LP show. I can't remember how much I've talked about this on the main show. That I think this really illustrates very well is when it comes to startups and investing, it's so easy. People make the mistake of focusing on what your TAM is today versus the much more important question of what your TAM is tomorrow. And this is such a great case study because like when ARM, the spinoff was getting started and they were developing the RISC processor, you could have looked at it and been like, this is so stupid. Like the TAM, the market today is for IBM PCs and it's the Microsoft, Intel, Wintel duopoly is getting started. Like this company's dead in the water. Like this is so stupid, right? But it was the TAM tomorrow of the coming mobile wave that was the opportunity and that was what mattered. Now, of course, that means that getting the timing right is super important. But if you can time correctly when the TAM tomorrow is going to start to realize, and you can get out in front of that and be building the technology, a couple years in advance so that it's ready. Like that's magical.
I am looking at a graph here with about 10 years where it looks like there's no growth in revenue. It's timing.
But it wasn't that long until from the time of the spin out, they got that TI contract for the Nokia 6110, within 3 years of the spin out. So like the devices weren't shipping yet, but they knew it was coming.
Yep. It's a great point. I have no tech themes. I have said all of mine.
Love it. Love it. Love it. For grading, what do you think about, we've talked about for grading more recent events, and I think this still qualifies as a recent event, the SoftBank acquisition. Let's paint the A plus scenario and the C or C minus scenario over the next 5 years.
All right. So I'll start with the A plus. If you believe in the thesis that David and I chatted about on the LP show, that ambient computing is the next computing wave. So to sort of review, there was PC, and that there was $1 trillion in that ecosystem of value created. Then there was the internet, and then mobile. And sort of what is that next thing? And what is that next wave of computing upon which platforms will be built that that enable entirely new use cases, new companies, and a new way that people interact with technology. And ambient computing is that thing. They're probably all going to have ARM chips in them, be it the AirPods that David and I are both wearing now, or the watches that I think we're both wearing now, or as our friends on the team that work there say, the lady in the tube that will respond to my voice when I get home, all the way down to sort of the litany of things that used to just be dumb embedded devices like the little oven timer or the little oven clock. There's a very reasonable chance that we have hundreds of ARM chips that we're interacting with over the course of the day. That makes us look like a pretty smart buy, assuming that was not already priced in. So when we just let's review that real quick. The $32 billion was bought for 18x earnings and 29x EBITDA. So already a fairly expensive stock, but yeah, still feels like a good buy if you believe that we're going to transition from sort of somewhere between one and a dozen that we regularly interact with to hundreds.
Yep. And it's funny, I'm just pulling up here because of course ARM still reports their results.
It's awesome that they do that. Yeah.
I know, it's so awesome that they do that. Okay, so totally agree. That's the A plus case. The C minus case, I think I fall in the A camp, but just to paint the bear picture here. So currently, for the most current results we have, total revenue for ARM over the last 4 quarters, so the trailing year of revenue, was $1.8 billion. So they bought the company SoftBank bought the company for $32 billion 2.5 years ago, for a company that is still doing less than $2 billion in revenue. That's a pretty big gap to fill, right? Like if you're anticipating significant returns on your acquisition from, already 2.5 years in the past, you need some of these new markets to start hitting big real soon from an IRR perspective. And, the royalty portion of the company's revenue, which is the alignment with partners.
So that's the one that's dependent on number of units shipped.
The one that's dependent on number of units shipped. And that's really what, I think the investment thesis is about, that number of units of shipped is gonna grow exponentially. It is the largest revenue stream in the company, but it's actually not growing that fast in terms of how much revenue they're getting. And I think that must be because they're just getting such a small amount from every device shipped. And as the devices proliferate and cheaper and more basic devices, like sensors and the like, become the vast majority of number of units, I bet they're getting fewer actual dollars from those.
Yeah, it's interesting. And this is an area, one other bear case is something that I'm not technical enough to evaluate, but what ARM was to mobile and Intel was to the desktop, is there going to be something else to the proliferation of devices and make ARM sort of look like the old grandpa technology? Is there some significantly lower power thing that literally just needs the vibrations of the EM spectrum in the air to power it, or something really crazy?
No, that's why I think this is in the full length of time. I don't see anything else on the horizon that can actually really replace ARM and the RISC architecture. But again, if you look at their financial results, like the fastest growing portion is software and services, right? This sounds like the Apple narrative, right? Of like, all is well, even though our, core business is flat to declining. Like we're making it up in services. Like that's not as defensible. So, I think that's this bear case is the company, while a great company and a foundational technology company, actually can't command that much of the value creation going forward from computing and doesn't end up being as good an investment as they expect it to be.
From the academic side of things, it depends how much ARM is the point of integration. If they're just a component that ships in phones and the real value is created, and the phone is the point of integration of hardware, software, services, and components, then most of that value accrues to the phone manufacturer, which is why Apple's worth over $500 billion. But to the extent that ARM actually has ecosystem lock-in and commands a lot of value for doing that, and in some way they're the point of integration, bringing the software developers who are able to write software that gets compiled to run on ARM processors with the actual device manufacturers, which they aren't. That explains why they command so much less of the value.
There you have it.
We shall see.
We shall see. Man, this was a fun one. Thank you, listeners, for bearing with us. I hope we did justice and communicated, a little bit about the technology, a little bit about the business model, hopefully a lot about the story, but also, why this is, no matter what corner of the technology ecosystem you live in, this is an important one to understand.
Yeah, and I don't think I really got that until digging in. I mean, it was always kind of mysterious to me of like, I just didn't understand why it got bought for so much when
they don't make anything.
They weren't making the chips. Yeah. And it's, it's been nice to have an hour and a half to understand that a little bit better.
All right, listeners, now is a great time to talk about one of our favorite companies, StatSig.
Yes, long-time acquired partner. There is a reason why the best product teams at companies like OpenAI and Notion, Atlassian, Figma, Rippling, Brex, and more rely on StatSig, whether they are iterating on their core product features or shipping AI-powered experiences at scale.
Yep. In the crazy speed of today's AI world, shipping fast is just table stakes now. It's basically trivial to build and deploy your app constantly. The real advantage is how quickly you learn what changes actually created value for customers and how fast you can use that signal to guide what you ship next. Whether it's a feature tweak, a pricing change, a performance improvement, or an AI update like a model change or prompt adjustment, they're not relying on instinct. They're measuring what actually moved engagement, retention, and ultimately revenue. And as more teams build with AI, that learning loop becomes even more important. Building with LLMs introduces non-determinism into your product experience. The same input doesn't always produce the same output, and behavior can shift in subtle ways in real-world use.
So doing offline evals will give you part of the picture, but you can really only understand the impact once your product is live with real users, and then you can measure how their behavior actually changes. It's very different than the way that you would ship features in a pre-AI world where you knew exactly what the software was going to do in production.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is where StatSig comes in. It brings experimentation, feature flags, and product analytics into one unified system so teams can ship safely, test rigorously, and directly link what they changed to how users actually behaved. The result is a tighter feedback loop and learning that compounds over time, so you don't just ship more, you ship better.
So if you want to make learning your competitive advantage, whether you're building new AI experiences or just evolving your existing core product, go to statsig.com/acquired to get started.
Well, folks, if you aren't subscribed and you want to hear more, you can subscribe from your favorite podcast client. If you like what we're talking about kind of the future of computing and ambient computing, you should consider becoming a limited partner. So kimberlite.fm/acquired or click the link in the show notes, and we'll have some pretty fun guests coming up on the LP show pretty soon that we're excited about. So we will see you all soon.
Indeed. See you next time.